When you let a tradesman into your home, like a plumber or an electrician, you're trusting someone you've never met before with access to your most private spaces. Most of the time, that trust isn't misplaced. But back in 2008, a family in Brisbane found out by complete accident that the plumber their neighbour had hired during renovations had left something behind. Something none of them were supposed to find. So first of all, I only just discovered this subreddit today, which reminded me of something that happened to me in 2008. This was a huge thing to my friends and family, and I didn't really talk about it back then as it scared the crap out of me. But it was a while ago and is a really well-known creepy story among myself and my friends and family. But I think I may as well share it, as it is admittedly terrifying. I was living with my parents and sister in Brisbane, Australia at the time, 2008, which means I was 19. I remember my dad had just got Foxtel, cable TV in Australia, but only the TV in the lounge room could use the cable box. And I really wanted to somehow get the cable in my room without paying $99 or whatever for a new box. So Dad one day went out and bought an AV transmitter and receiver. It was basically a two-piece bit of hardware where you would plug this tiny box into the cable TV in the lounge room and it would transmit a video signal to the receiver connected to the TV in my room. So one Saturday, I decided to connect it. This is a picture I took of the setup when I was telling a friend the story. My younger sister, 16 at the time, was the only other person home at the time, upstairs in her room. My room was downstairs. I opened the box and connected it up. At first I was going back and forth, trying to get the cables right, trying to get the channel right, etc., but no luck. Until I finally got something. I remember just sitting there, and something started fuzzing in. This is where things start to feel like a horror movie. I remember thinking, oh, here we go, and waiting to see the picture come in clearly. As it started fuzzing in, I remembered that this whole time the cable set-top box wasn't even on, and that's why it wasn't working this whole time. But then why was I getting a signal? It seemed to all hit me at once. As I realised the box was off, the picture fuzzed in, and I saw a bed. This was the first picture I took. I just freaked out, as at first I thought it was my bed. I'd recently seen Saw 2 and remembered that scene where she turns on the TV and there's a camera filming her in her apartment. That was the first thing I thought of. I sprinted upstairs to my sister, absolutely terrified. I told her to come down and take a look. She came down and we both realised it wasn't my bed. We didn't know whose bed it was or how I was getting the signal. Obviously it was the AV receiver picking up a camera signal, but we were just so confused as to who or what it was for. Eventually my parents came home and we concluded that it would have to be a neighbour or someone living close by for us to be receiving the signal. We waited around until about 6 p.m. and then someone came into the room. My dad recognised it as one of our neighbours. We still didn't know what the camera was for, but we assumed it had something to do with fidelity. Either his wife or he had set it up to watch the other and see if they were cheating. Either this, or it was to tape themselves having sex. We entertained the idea that he was a murderer and would film himself murdering people in his room, but just to freak each other out. We'd always make jokes about how one night we'll turn it on and it'll just be his face with clown makeup on staring at the camera waving, and then him walking out of the bedroom with a knife. This never happened, but what did happen was still super creepy. We connected to this signal for over a week, but after a few days the novelty kinda wore off. We felt a bit weird watching it, and just resigned to the explanation that it was to catch his wife cheating. Until one day, we turned it on, and realised what we had discovered. Our neighbours were having a bunch of renovations done to their house. During weekdays they would be out, and there would be workers at the place pretty much all day. It had been like this for over a month. We started watching the feed and saw a man walk into their room. It was the plumber that had been there regularly for the renovations. We didn't think anything of it until he started opening the drawers. I called out to my mum, the only person home at the time, and we started watching it. He started getting the wife's underpants and sniffing them, doing all that creepy shit. At first, we were like, oh my god, how embarrassing, he's being filmed. Will the neighbours see this somehow? But then what happened next was truly terrifying. He slowly walked over to the camera and looked right down the damn lens. We were convinced that he knew we were watching. Mum immediately called Dad. I kept watching. He started fiddling with it and then put it back down. I told Mum that I don't think he knew we were watching, but he's definitely the guy that put the camera there. Dad came home, and by this time, the plumber had left. Much to Mum's pleading, Dad went over to the neighbours to tell them what we saw. Mum wanted to completely stay out of it and was terrified, understandably. When we told the neighbours, they had no idea what we were talking about. They allowed Dad to go up to their room, and what he found was an installed device in the wall that was designed to monitor water usage, which was completely normal at the time, as Brisbane had been hit with a drought recently, and there were lots of water restrictions. Still is now, I think. The plumber had installed this into the wall, but had fitted a camera behind it in the wall to watch the bed. They immediately called the police, who came over and conducted an investigation. For the next week or so, we didn't hear much about it. I spent most of this time just telling my friends, showing them pictures, but truthfully, my whole family was scared every night. It was just very creepy thinking that we could have stuff like that hidden in our house. Chances are we didn't, but it was still really scary. After a couple of weeks, my mum was speaking to the wife next door and asked what happened with it all. The wife said that the police found out he would come to our street at night and sit in his car, which had really tinted windows, and watch them on his laptop. When Mum told me this, I got the biggest shivers. The reason was, besides the obvious of a creepy dude sitting in his car watching people through a hidden camera, was because on multiple nights, when I had driven home late from my girlfriend's or walked home drunk after a night out, I remember seeing a station wagon, don't know if that's what they're called outside of Australia, but it's like a big hatchback car, always about 30 metres down the street from our house. It was never there during the day, always at night. I'd always walk past it and look at my reflection in the windows, assuming no one was inside. I was always so confused by whose car it was, but literally never thought it was anything. It still scares me so much that it was just this creepy damn plumber sitting back in there on a laptop, watching a hidden camera stream of my neighbours. Anyway, that's my story. It's all true and still creeps me out to this day, but my friends and I have a good laugh about it. Most of us have stayed in a hotel at some point, and there's an unspoken assumption that when you close that hotel room door behind you, you're alone. But this isn't always the case. Back in January 2019, a user by the name tbug411 shared their story of how she realised she'd been sharing her room with a complete stranger, not just for that one day or night, but possibly the entire time she'd been there. This past Monday, my co-workers and I returned to our hotel from a day of work out in the field. Rebecca and I walked to our rooms, and as we stood outside of our rooms, I opened mine, and I saw someone in the bathroom. I said, "Hello?" Nobody answered. My first instinct was that it was a cleaning lady in there for some reason, and then I saw my bag with my clothes in her hands. I said to my co-worker, "There's a woman in my room." Then I asked the woman, "What are you doing with my stuff?" It gets a little fuzzy here because I can't remember everything I said and what she said, but she kept mumbling about how her key still worked, and that's how she got in. I was in shock, and she was obviously very flustered, having been caught mid-robbery. She dropped my bags and fumbled around with her purse and a white plastic bag. By this time, my co-worker was behind me watching all the insanity unfold. This woman was scrambling and walking towards the door, and I said, "What's in the bag?" Thinking it's probably my stuff, and so she said, No, it's just my things, I'll show you." And so she did. I looked and I didn't see anything of mine, and so since I'm obviously in shock at this time, I let her leave. I went into my room, and it's been ransacked. I did a quick look around to see if anything had been taken. All of my electronics were still there. Then I went into the bathroom, and I saw my underwear, my bikini, and my clothes shoved into my own bags randomly. Even my passport was shoved in there. Then I looked on the counter and I saw that she got into my medication. I'm not sure what was going through my head at the moment other than I wanted it back, so I ran out the door to go find her. I ran to the laundry room downstairs and out to the sides of the hotel, and I didn't see her. I realised I was never going to find her, So my co-worker and I went down to the lobby to tell them what happened, and then we called the police. We went back up to my room to wait, and I noticed that there's a metal bat on my bed, a little larger than one of those novelty wooden bats you can get at a baseball game. But there's also a flashlight on the end. She must have left it behind in her hurry. She also left behind a necklace that must have fallen out of her bag when she was scrambling with mine. I was mostly freaking out at this point because I thought that she'd gotten away with my medication that I need. The police got there and took our statements and looked around the room as well. One thing that I noticed was that there were bits of drywall in the sink, and I pointed that out to the cops, but none of us really knew where it came from. We started looking at the door and the windows to see if she pried her way in somehow, but there was nothing. So we kind of just went with the idea that she had a spare key or something, even though the hotel front desk was adamant that there's no way that could be. The officer that came brought 2 more officers as backup because they thought the woman might still be in the vicinity. But after our statements were taken, there was nothing else they could really do, so they left. I sat down to finally make some calls to tell people, and as I'm on the phone, I'm thinking about the drywall in the sink, and it still didn't make sense to me. So I'm on the phone and looking at the drywall and the mirror on the wall right above it, and then it hit me. I got my co-worker and asked her to help me pull at this mirror on the wall. We took the mirror down, and there's a hole there just big enough for a desperate junkie to squeeze through. I asked Brian and Rebecca if I should call the cops again to let them know that I found this, and my boss said there's still 2 cop cars in the parking lot. So I went down to tell them, and the female cop kinda rolled her eyes, but the young guy said, "I'll come check it out." They both came back up, looked in the hole, and found a pillow, blankets, cigarettes, clothes, toothbrushes. This woman had been living in the wall behind my mirror for God knows how long. She had access to me and my room at all times. I know it might be hard to picture. There was a crawl space about 2 feet wide in between the 2 rows of rooms. One of the officers called the original officer to come back and take pictures of this. She explained to him what's going on, and all I hear over the radio is, "There's just no way." He comes back, takes pictures, and is just as mind-blown as the rest of us. Obviously, we packed up and left immediately. What's even crazier is she's probably been there a long time. The last time we stayed at this hotel, I would randomly smell cigarette smoke, and I assumed someone was smoking in their bathroom, and it was traveling through the vents. But nope, a junkie was smoking just on the other side of my mirror. She had access to other rooms too. The holes in the walls were from a renovation, and the hotel hadn't properly patched and just covered up with mirrors. She could have been hanging out in people's rooms when they were gone. Anyway, this was insane, and I'm taking a little time off. Posting from mobile, so sorry if the formatting is off. The OP then shared a photo of the hole in the wall where the woman had been coming in and out of the room from. The OP said in the comments she'd be taking some kind of legal action against the hotel for allowing this to happen. But aside from that, I couldn't find any further information about this in the thread or elsewhere online. As for the woman living in the hole in the wall, we can only assume she was arrested and charged. There's a lot of fetishes out there, and while some might be unusual, there's always an element of consent between those exploring them. But there's places on the internet where that line gets crossed, where something presents itself as a fetish, but begins to look a lot more like something else entirely. Death feederism is one of those places, and what happens inside is something that's genuinely difficult to look at. The subreddit's description says it's a place focused on SSBBW and SSBHM content, which stands for Supersized Big Beautiful Woman or Big Handsome Man respectively. They're terms used within plus-size communities to describe overweight people who embrace their size, referring specifically to people who are significantly obese, generally over 350 pounds, or just under 160 kilos. But within this community sits something called feederism, a fetish where one person, the feeder, gets sexual gratification from encouraging someone else to eat and gain weight, and the feedee, the person gaining, gets gratification from being fed and growing bigger. For most people who practice it, it stays within limits. But death feederism is a specific subset where the fantasy goes further, with each step getting darker and darker. The first stage is immobility. The idea of getting a feedee to a point where they physically can't move around on their own anymore and become entirely dependent on someone else for basic day-to-day life. Ate myself immobile. After 7,000 calories, I'm pinned to the bed, getting closer to immobility. I need to be immobile. I want to keep growing bigger and fatter. If anyone is interested in feeding me, my DMs are open. From there, the next stage is gaining weight to the point where the body begins to fail, where organs come under pressure and everyday functions become impossible, and death is a realistic outcome. Death isn't something that's feared, it's glorified. 21 years old and 315 pounds. I can't wait to eat myself to death. 22 years old and completely committed to eating till my heart gives out. Excited to be heading on to my early grave. Now, for most people in this space, that's where it stays, as a fantasy. It's something they talk about online, something they find exciting as an idea, without any real intention of seeing it through. But some people do see it through, and the line between fantasy and reality in these communities is blurry enough that people are dying, as the fetish romanticizes weight gain to the point where health issues are a serious risk. Take Patty Sanchez, for example. She was a Californian woman who married her feeder in 2002 and began gaining weight professionally under the name Goddess Patty. At the peak of her gaining, she was consuming over 13,000 calories a day, and her husband was actively encouraging her to keep going. Her highest weight was 721 pounds, or 327 kilos. By that point, she was unable to walk unaided, requiring round-the-clock care from her son, and hadn't left the house in weeks. When her marriage ended, she didn't step away from the feederism world. Instead, she enlisted a group of devoted male fans she called her harem to continue feeding her, and they'd take her to a local truck weighing station every month to track her gains. She later said she'd spent years gaining weight to please other people, and that she realized she was killing herself. She lost a significant amount of weight after leaving that world behind, but the damage was done. Patty Sanchez died of kidney failure on the 17th of September 2021. She was 57 years old. Then there was Juliet Summers, a woman from North Carolina who was active on Phoebe, the main feederism website. She reached a weight of 890 pounds, or just over 400 kilos, and passed away on the 11th of December 2019. And then there was Adeline, whose real name was Sigfrida Alana Bird. She was a feedee from Florida who reached a weight of 703 pounds, or 318 kilos at her peak. She passed away on the 20th of January 2026 at just 33 years old. And these are just some examples. The BBW Wiki lists 38 people in total who have died from feederism, and this is just well-known people in the community. There could be hundreds more out there, including those who are active in the subreddit. As they consume more and grow larger in size, their fan base may grow, but they are quite literally eating themselves to an early grave, and that idea of fantasy becomes a reality. Imagine finding out that someone you've known your whole life, someone you've trusted completely, was hiding something from you, and the way you found out wasn't from them, or even your family, but from a complete stranger on the internet. This happened to Green Dot back in 2013 in the news subreddit. Someone had posted an article about the Yarnell Hill Fire, a devastating wildfire near Yarnell, Arizona, which took the lives of 19 members of the Granite Mountain Hotshots, a group of firefighters within the Prescott Fire Department. It's the 6th deadliest American firefighter disaster in history, but was particularly worrisome for Green Dot, as their stepfather, Jim Coyle, was the Yarnell fire chief. They wrote, "Ugh, I can't sleep. My stepdad is the fire chief there. My mom is a paramedic but firefights too." And then someone replied, "You know who else can't sleep? The 3-year-old your stepdad buried and killed. Disgusting." I've known the man almost 30 years, and this is the first I've heard of this. I don't really have anything to add or dispute. I'm very shocked. The man I know is a dedicated firefighter, EMT, and trainer, besides a greater father and grandfather. I don't know what happened 40 years ago. I can't defend that. But the comment turned out to be true. Green Dot had no idea, but the internet did. In 1973, Jim Coyle was a firefighter and EMT in Mesa, Arizona, and was living with his girlfriend and her 3-year-old daughter, a little girl named Carla K. Dahlstedt. On the 12th of December that year, Coyle said he spanked and pushed Carla for lying, and she hit her head on the edge of her crib and was knocked unconscious. He tried mouth-to-mouth and cardiac massage, but when she didn't respond, he concluded she was dead. So he drove her to the desert near the Mesa dump, and he buried her. When his girlfriend came home, he told her Carla had been abducted or wandered away. 6 hours later, after police questioning, he broke and led them back to where he'd buried her. But when they dug her up, she was still alive. She died in hospital the next day from brain damage. Coyle was convicted of manslaughter by a Maricopa County jury in 1974 and was sentenced to 5 years probation. 5 years later, a judge granted his request to have the conviction dismissed entirely and his civil rights fully restored. He went on to become a firefighter, an EMT trainer, and eventually the fire chief of Yarnell, Arizona. But when the Yarnell Hill fire tore through the town in June 2013, killing 19 firefighters and destroying over 100 homes, residents started asking questions about Coyle's handling of the department. He'd failed to spend a $15,000 grant for clearing flammable vegetation around homes, and he turned down an offer of assistance from a neighboring fire department when the fire was first spotted. The post-fire report described the town as essentially indefensible because of dangerous brush buildup near homes, something that could have been addressed. Multiple firefighters and dispatchers had already quit before and after the fire, citing his management. And then on the 7th of October 2013, a few months after the Reddit comments, the Prescott Daily Courier published the story of Carla K. Dahlstedt. 2 days later, Jim Coyle resigned as fire chief at a board meeting. Green Dot sat with that Reddit comment for 2 weeks before responding. When they did, they wrote, "So it's been 2 weeks since you hit me with this. I thought I could come up with some eloquent retort, but nothing really formed. I'm left with this. It's clear that 40 years ago something tragic did happen. I can't deny that. He went on trial. This went through the courts and he got his punishment. Jim was in his 20s when that happened. He was a lowly EMT in a tiny town. He was not rich and didn't buy his way out of this. However the facts played out, the courts decided his fate. End of story. It's not your place in this society to keep trying him for the same crime. This is not an episode of America's Most Wanted. You're a coward and leech. You're a leech because you used the Yarnell disaster to further your crusade against Jim. You're a coward because you can't even use your real account. You're a coward because while my family was out there fighting the fires, you were at home, throwing your jabs. Why weren't you down there in Yarnell screaming the same message? That's right, you would have looked like an idiot, and the sheriff would have escorted you home. You're also a very evil shit. You knew that this post was by a family member, and you had to do a drive-by without even knowing that I knew this or not. You had to keep pushing this agenda with really no care as to the downstream effects. Is it fair that Jim is still walking around after his crime? Again, the courts decided it was fair. Would society have better been served if he was locked up as a murderer? How many lives have been saved directly and indirectly by Jim? Jim is not an evil man. He's not a sociopath. He is kind and thoughtful. He is a thinker. You can't turn this type of stuff off, and I'm sure he's thought about it every day of his life. Are we not allowed to atone for our sins? I think he has. Unlike you, I've known the man since 1984. Unlike you, I get to judge him on who the man he was, not the man in the newspaper article. Someone asked, "You seem pissed at the guy for telling you this, but wouldn't you rather know than not?" I don't like that they chose to use the night of the fire to bring it up. There is a time and place. That was disrespectful, and they were cowardly about how they did it. Both the Green Dot account and Throwaway account have since been deleted and inactive since this thread began. As for Jim, he lived a quiet life for 40 years, but it took just one Reddit comment to change that.